National Guard troops patrolling the nation's capital are now carrying firearms. The majority will carry M17 pistols, their service-issued weapons, according to a Defense Department official, while a small number of the troops will be armed with their service M4 rifles. National Guard troops were seen walking around the city with pistols holstered on their hips and MP patches designating their role as military police. You see them on the screen. On Friday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized Guard members in D.C. to carry those weapons, and it's a shift from their previously unarmed status. They're authorized to use those weapons for self-protection only. As of Sunday, there were more than 2,000 National Guard soldiers and airmen assigned to D.C., including Guard from Louisiana, Mississippi, Ohio, and other states. Despite the deployment, D.C. police data shows violent crime is down roughly 27% year over year, according to D.C. police data. Meanwhile, new reporting reveals the Pentagon has been planning a military deployment to Chicago for weeks now, as President Trump turns his head towards the next city amid his plans to crack down on crime, homelessness, and undocumented immigration. Officials familiar with the matter tell The Washington Post that the planning involves several options, including mobilizing at least a few thousand members of the National Guard to Chicago as soon as next month. On Friday, Trump touted his ongoing National Guard intervention here in D.C. and zeroed in on Chicago as the next target.
Chicago's a mess. You have an incompetent mayor, grossly incompetent, and we'll straighten that one out probably next. That'll be our next one after this, and it won't even be tough. And the people in Chicago, Mr. Vice President, are screaming for us to come.
The mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, touted his city's falling crime rate in an interview yesterday and said Trump's threats are unconstitutional and costly.
This president is not taking his role and his responsibility as serious as mayors like myself and across the country are, because we actually have to show up and deliver for people, where he gets to show up and make a mockery out of our democracy. It's unconstitutional, it's illegal, it's costly, and it's not going to drive violence down in our city. The work that we're doing is working. If he's serious, he would work with us.
Our colleague Shaq Brewster doing that interview. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker also weighed in, accusing the president of attempting to manufacture a crisis, in his words, adding that it might be abusing his power. Meanwhile, President Trump is also threatening to send the military into Baltimore to quickly clean up crime there. Trump's threat came in a post on social media yesterday, where he also criticized Maryland's Governor Wes Moore, writing in part, "If Wes Moore needs help like Gavin Newsom did in L.A., I will send in the troops." The president also threatened to pull federal funding for the replacement of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which collapsed in 2024. And he questioned whether Moore, an Army veteran who served in Afghanistan, lied about receiving a Bronze Star. No evidence at all there. Trump's remarks came after Moore said that Trump's comments about fighting crime, quote, come off as so tone-deaf and so ignorant. Despite Trump's claims, violent crime is on the decline in Baltimore. Homicides are down 24%, while non-fatal shootings are down 18%. Governor Wes Moore is going to join us to discuss all of this later on Morning Joe. But for now, joining us, NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, troops carrying weapons appears to be a major escalation here. It's one that we've known was coming. But do we have any idea why that order was turned around?
No, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, because one thing that you have some members of the Metropolitan Police Department who are actually called into the, National Guard, and they have to worry about, whether or not they would be disarmed when they joined the National Guard contingent. So this is a very complicated maneuver. Around the city these days, you have just very different protocols for all the different police departments, for all the different agencies that are involved on the streets of D.C. It's just extremely complicated, and you have a lot of pushback coming from D.C. Residents. There was another incident last night where a lot of protesters gathered, banging on pots and pans as it appeared several different agencies were involved in a raid on a home. So there's just a lot of tension, certainly in the city. Right now, it's, as you see in that photo there, we do see, individuals with arms there.
Yeah, certainly an escalation, and one that brings both the optics that have been so central to most of the actions of the Trump administration, but then also could just only ratchet up the tension, as you and I have seen, even just in the communities where we live, people pushing back and sort of countering National Guard troops that they see on the street with pots, pans, jeers, all of that. And it leads us to the question of how we led the show, which is that Baltimore and Chicago could be next. Is there anything that these cities can do to prepare or fight back? I know in our conversations, Ryan, we've talked about how D.C. is sort of not the perfect blueprint for this to be pushed in other places because of D.C.'s home rule rules. But places like Los Angeles, we've seen Trump call in the National Guard over the objection of the governors there. So is that probably more likely what we end up seeing in places like Chicago and Baltimore?
Yeah, you could see more pushback in legally. That was certainly something Gavin Newsom was taking up, and this, California was taking up. DC is, as you just mentioned, sort of uniquely situated, and also depends upon the federal government in many ways, and Donald Trump has a lot of power over DC, and just even the budget. There's just a lot of ways for him to push those buttons, and there is a legal way for him to take over, to have some authority for a limited basis over the Metropolitan Police Department. So I think we will see some more pushback, but these things do take a while to play out through the courts, and it can be. I don't suspect there'll be an instant way to block that, and it seems Donald Trump is previewing what he's planning on doing in those cities.
Yeah, previewing it. And frankly, again, we just have to look back to Los Angeles. It seems like it was a while ago. It was like a month and a half, 2 months ago that we saw National Guard troops deployed there. And you're right, it got tied up in the courts, but it's a slow moving process. The other story that we've been tracking, and I want to get your take on, is Vice President J.D. Vance reacting and denying claims that the search at the home and office of former National Security Advisor John Bolton was for political retribution. You and I were covering this on the air together on Friday, because that's when federal agents were seen carrying boxes out of Bolton's home in Bethesda, Maryland. The source familiar with the matter tells NBC News the FBI is investigating Bolton for the mishandling of classified information. The source says CIA Director John Ratcliffe actually provided FBI Director Kash Patel with that information, and it was the basis of Friday's search warrant. Bolton, of course, has been an outspoken critic of President Trump, despite serving in his first administration. He was fired in 2019 and then later published a scathing memoir about his time in the White House. Now a source close to Bolton is calling the investigation retribution. The vice president, however, denied that allegation on NBC's Meet the Press yesterday. Watch.
Our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come. But as you know, Kristen, this is all part of gathering evidence, trying to understand something that we're worried about. And of course, I'll let the FBI comment on the next stage of the investigation. If they ultimately bring a case, it will be because they determine that he has broken the law. We're going to be careful about that. We're going to be deliberate about that, because we don't think that we should throw people, even if they disagree with us politically, maybe especially if they disagree with us politically. You shouldn't throw people willy-nilly in prison. You should let the law drive these determinations, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, so Ryan, that's the vice president reacting there. But just days before this raid at Bolton's home, Trump revamped attacks on Bolton on social media. On the campaign trail, Trump, of course, vowed repeatedly to go after his political enemies. And even just in the last 24 hours, now he's tweeting about someone else who was a former ally turned critic in the form of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. So how much of this is retribution versus actual investigation, specifically around Bolton? And are you hearing from your sources within the FBI, which are a crucial piece of actually doing these kinds of raids and investigations, that there is concern or tension? I mean, you and I were talking about this Friday. A few days have now elapsed.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I noticed from that interview was the use of we. He kept saying we, which was just very not the way that things are spoken about in terms of, if you're not part of the investigation, if this is a separate entity, if this is the FBI and the Justice Department driving this investigation, then you would refer to they, right? But he's putting himself sort of in that contingent and being part of that prosecution. That's just not the way that things are typically done. Since Watergate, you've had more of that separation between the White House and the Justice Department, and that does not seem to be the case here. There's just a lot of overlap. Now, Donald Trump did say that he just, he found out about this from the news, but those comments from Donald Trump and the targeting of his enemies and the way that he's explicitly gone after them the way that the Justice Department has been really willing to directly target people Donald Trump was critical of, including by firing a number of prosecutors who were involved in January 6th offenses, is impossible to sort of miss here. Even though we should say that this did go through a magistrate judge, right? So that is something that there's, evidence of at least a probable cause that there was reason to believe that there could have been documents in that house. But Donald Trump's comments, I think, really suggest that there is more to the story here.
Yeah, and I think that underlying affidavit, what evidence was put before a judge to actually get not just an FBI agent, but then also a magistrate judge to sign off on these warrants for 2 search locations is going to be so important as we continue to put together what exactly happened here. We'll leave it there for now. NBC's Ryan Riley, thank you so much for coming on. Your latest piece is available to read online now. Always such great reporting.